All right, all right, all right. Welcome, everybody. Another episode of Legend Sports and Amplify. And we are here today with Jorge Colón Delgado, who is the official historian of the Puerto Rico Professional Baseball League, also Baseball 101, his website, and Negro Leaguers in Puerto Rico. How are you, sir?
How are you, Philip? Thank you for having me in your program.
Thank
Uh,
you, thank you. I appreciate your time. And we talked for a few minutes before we got on here why I'm doing this and why I think it's important to tell these stories. And we're going to get to hear some stories from you, which I think will be a lot of fun. And those connections that go back between Puerto Rico and the Negro Leagues, Latin America, and the Negro Leagues, that pipeline. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So tell us a little bit about you. I love hearing origin stories. I had on Dr. James Brunson, who he used that term origin story about the Negro Leaguers, how they got their starts and all those beginnings. And everybody's got them because baseball's kind of like a passion, right? It kind of gets in you. So tell us how you got into this and how you became involved in baseball history in Puerto Rico.
well, since a kid, I followed baseball, and but in 1999, I went to Cooperstown to the induction of Orlando Cepeda, and I went to the library to buy some books, and I didn't see books of Puerto Rico, but I saw one of Cuba in English,
Interesting.
and I say, how come this guy, person was a doctor, Jorge Figueredo, how come this man wrote this book in the exile, and we don't have any book in Puerto Rico in Cooperstown. So in that moment, July 1999, I decided to study and investigate the history of baseball in Puerto Rico to now.
Awesome. You know, it's funny. I mentioned this to you before we started. Everybody has kind of that light bulb moment, right? Mine was in
Mhm,
'92, meeting some of
mhm.
these guys at that benefit that I told you about that Reggie Jackson held for those Negro League Players Association players. And so many other authors and researchers and other people, card artists, musicians, they just kind of have that aha, right? Like where was all this? Where was all this history before? How come I never heard about some of this? And you want to find out more. And so it sounds like you have a pretty similar story when it comes to baseball in Puerto Rico. Now you said something interesting to me before we started though that I thought was interesting, that there's not a lot of baseball that is talked about by Puerto Ricans outside of Puerto Rico. Is that true?
Yes, we have a problem that we speak and write for us in Spanish, but we do not write in books in English. I think there are only two books in English. It was written by the same person, Thomas Van Heining, and
Wow.
Puerto Rico history, baseball history has been lost. Now with the Negro leaguers,
Another
they're
light.
interested, and when we and I'm with my web page,
It's a great
and I
web
have
page.
contacts with you and other people from the United States, and like I said, this is a goal opportunity to talk about Puerto Rico in English because there's a lot of history. Puerto Rico has been great to baseball in Puerto Rico, Negro leagues and big leagues.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, right? Because I mentioned to you, my wife is a originally from Guadalajara, Mexico, so she's, obviously fluent in Spanish. All my boys are, fluent in Spanish
Yeah.
and English as well, which is something that we really wanted to make sure was important. Now, me, my Spanish is still developing. I can understand most of it. I get a little awkward, so I kind of get what you're saying because for me to speak in Spanish. I'm a little bit, I'm a little reluctant to do it sometimes, because what happens a lot of times if I'm out somewhere and I do respond or speak in Spanish, people will start talking to me as if I understand it completely, and I have to like, okay, so I understand what you're talking about for sure. But the thing that I thought was interesting was I've also interviewed several children's books authors that. wrote books on baseball history, Negro League history that all tied into what I'm doing, and some of them were done bilingual. Were done in English and Spanish, which I think is absolutely awesome. I think we need more of those. We need every book that's ever been written about baseball to be done in both English and Spanish, so people could
Yes.
not only be able to understand them and follow along, but also you learn that way. That's how I've been learning over the years by trying to read in Spanish and English and make those connections, because it's hard. It's hard when you don't grow up learning it as a kid like I didn't until much older. It takes a little longer to pick it up, but those types of books I think are important to have both. And there was one I came across on Roberto Clemente that was written by Jonah Winter. Have you ever seen that book? It's a children's book. He wrote it, boy, I want to say it was in the 90s even. And I'll send you the link to it. But Jonah Winter is a children's book author who's written dozens of books, many on the Negro Leagues, many on Latin American baseball stars. And he wrote one on Roberto Clemente that a lot of teachers have gone ahead and
Hmm.
done the English Spanish and done their own YouTube videos. And it's just been great. I hope more people do those types of projects because I think it would be really, really cool to get kids involved in this. The
Yeah,
next generation, like I was telling
I
you.
agree. I agree with you.
So Puerto Rican baseball history. I know Cuban baseball history goes back, you know, 1860s, even
Mhm.
1870s. Puerto Rican baseball history is a little later than that, but still been around a long, long time. What can you tell us about the roots of baseball in Puerto Rico?
Well, in Puerto Rico, we began practicing in 1896. A young guy from the name of Amos Iglesias Lampelt. He was 16 years old when he came to Puerto Rico. His father was from Puerto Rico. His mother was from New York. He lived in New York and came to Puerto Rico in 1985. And then he noticed he knew how to play the game. He learned in the States. And he noticed that there was no baseball action in San Juan. One day he was walking in San Juan and he saw this guy with a bat in the hand in his hand, and he approached him and said, "Hey, do they play baseball here?" And he said, "Well, there's some kids here, some young fellows from Cuba, that residents in the capital, San Juan, that they know how to play baseball." And he said, "Well, okay, I want to meet them." So he made the approach, and with those Cubans and Amos Iglesias Bampel, they taught Puerto Ricans to play baseball. That was in 1996.
1896.
1896,
Wow,
1897, and January 9th, 1898, the first official game was held in Puerto Rico.
very cool.
Two teams, Borinquen, composed by Puerto Ricans, and Almendares, composed by those Cubans. And that's the beginning of the baseball in Puerto Rico. It was in Spain was still
Hmm.
governing Puerto Rico before
Right.
the American invasion in May of that year. But then when the Americans established in Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rican polished their skills. And slow but steady, that we became better players. And in 1913, the first American team visited Puerto Rico. The name was All American. It was a good team. And they came here for a series. And a team from Ponce High School, beat that team. And that's when Puerto Ricans got the feeling, hey, we are good.
Yeah.
We are good. We have the talent. And then from there on in 1916 came the first Negro League team, a Cuban star of Alejandro Pompes. And those Negro League teams came to Puerto Rico in the winter, almost all winter, with other teams, until 1938 that the Puerto Rico Baseball League, professional league, started, began. But that's more or less what happened in that period.
So I do know in just doing my reading and digging and researching that like I said, Cuban baseball I knew went back a long way, 1860s, 1870s,
Mhm.
and then they came here in those um all Cubans tours in the late 1890s, early 1900s, and then they
Mhm.
worked their way into the black baseball. The
Mhm.
Negro leagues weren't, at least not the ones recognized by Major League Baseball,
Mhm.
were not yet formed yet until 1920. But many of those teams, Cuban Stars, East, Cuban Stars West, many of the all Cubans, all those teams, they came from that tour and they kept coming back, and then some of those players stayed and so forth. Who were some of the first early Puerto Rican baseball stars back in those early days?
Well, the first Puerto Rican to go to the States to play in the Negro Leagues, not organized Negro League, was Jesus El Tigre Velázquez Muñoz. He was he was shortstop. That was the first one, 1917. Then Rafael Cruz from Ponce, a pitcher, 1919. And in 1926, the first Puerto Rican to play in the organized Negro Leagues is Jose El Gacho Torres, pitcher and first baseman. And so with that, always, all this year, the first Puerto Rican in the big leagues was Iran Bithorn with the Chicago Cubs. Now is
Right.
Jose El Gacho Torres with the Newark in the Eastern Color League. That's the first one. And then came Emilio Millito Navarro.
Uh-huh.
And Francisco Pancho Coimbre was a big star in the Negro Leagues
Yes.
and in Puerto Rico. And so that was the highlights in Puerto Rico in the Negro Leagues. And then we have Luis Marquez, who was the first Puerto Rican in the big leagues that we know. Marquez was the first Negro to be signed by the New York Yankees. He didn't play with the Yankees in the big leagues, but he was the first Black player to be signed by the New York Yankees. And then came Nino Escalera, the first Black player with Cincinnati, and Ruben Gomez. Vic Power would play with the Yankees.
Vic Power, right?
Vic Power, a great first baseman.
Gold Glove winner for many years. He was fantastic first baseman.
Yeah, 7 Glove winner. Then Roberto Clemente, the great one. Orlando Cepeda, Juan Pizarro, and so on and so on.
Boy, the when you start digging through some of these stories and it must be a lot of fun over the years for you to have done a lot of this research and stuff. You just, every time you go to look for something else, you step on something else. It's like a spider web that just, know. So I've been doing this little project just while this lockout is going on in Major League Baseball to pass some time, maybe give a little context, a little history to baseball, and just a project of integrating baseball from the beginning through a simulation game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I came across, we're now in the 1920s, and I came across Monchile Concepcion, right?
Ramon Monchile Concepcion.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because when I started looking at some more about his background, I was like, oh my goodness, he was involved. I mean, I know the story of how the Brooklyn Dodgers originally had Roberto Clemente and then lost him in the Rule 5 draft to the Pirates. But I had no idea, way back in 1952, it was Monchile Concepcion and others that had a Brooklyn Dodger tryout in Puerto Rico. And that's how he ended up signing and playing. I think it was for Santurce, right? First?
Yeah, and then, Santurce Cangrejeros. Yeah, but Monchile Concepcion, not other than. Besides that, he practiced Roberto Clemente every afternoon in El Sisto Escobar Stadium. So because he wanted Roberto to know how the tryout was going to be, and he practiced every afternoon. Roberto Clemente. This is what they're going to ask you to do in that tryout.
Awesome.
One day, Roberto Clemente told Monchile, "I want you to practice me in shortstop," because he had a powerful arm and he played shortstop. And Monchile told him, "No, Roberto, you're better in the outfield. Stay in the outfielder because you have too much powerful, but not precise throw." And Roberto didn't like it. From the way back from Francisco Escobar Stadium to his house, Roberto kept quiet in the car, but he was very polite. He was very educated, and he didn't say nothing. But he didn't like that. But when Al Campanis came to Puerto Rico in September 1952, they try out Roberto Clemente, and they didn't sign him because he hadn't finished school, high school.
Oh, wow.
And so they signed him in 1954. That's why they signed him in 1954. 2 years later.
Wow. Are you familiar? Do you know Professor Rob Ruck? Do you know Professor Ruck?
No, no.
Oh boy, I'm gonna have to get you in touch with him. He's written some fantastic books on baseball history, baseball history in Latin America as well. And one is called The Tropic of Baseball, where he talks about baseball and the roots, through the Negro Leagues and early Latin baseball. But he's telling me stories that I don't know how many in Dominican Republic, for an example. There, there's something like 200 baseball camps or something going on down there
Mhm.
at any given time. Every team, and they're signing these kids now with $1 million signing bonuses at like 12, 14 years old now.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Well, what happens in Puerto Rico is that since 1990, we are in the draft, and
Oh,
we are, yeah, we are in the
yeah.
draft as the United States. But before that, we were in the draft,
Ah,
and
that's a great
that's
point.
why that's why the amount of players from Puerto Rico has decreased, because we have to compete with the United States.
That's an interesting point. I never even thought of that. Yeah, so Dominican Republic gets around that with the fact that they're an international team, so they come in through as international free agents. Interesting. Boy, oh boy,
Yeah,
I never thought of that. That's an interesting
yeah,
point.
because let's say the Yankee has a baseball academy in Dominican Republic. They prepare those players, and they sign those players for
Hmm.
the team. But you're not going to prepare players for other teams. That's
Right.
why we don't have those great amount of schools from the big league, New York, big league teams in Puerto Rico.
So your website, baseball101.com, you're covering not just the history. You've got Negro League history on there. You got Puerto Rican baseball history, but you're carrying current news as well on there, right?
Yes, yes, I have five writers.
Okay.
They have all that passion that I have for baseball, and we have articles in Spanish and in English.
Awesome. That's what I was going to ask you. Who was writing and how were you doing that? Because that's a great way to do it. I think in both because it gets that exposure out there. And then your other website you've got out there, Negro Leaguers Puerto Rico, right? That
Yes,
covers just strictly the Negro Leaguers.
the Negro leaguers who play in Puerto Rico, I have identified more or less 220.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it goes back a long, 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 long way. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, since you are the historian with Puerto Rican baseball, um, how does the research go? How are you doing the research? Because I've spoken with quite a number of people who have done a lot of the digging, seam heads, which I know you're very familiar with,
Yes.
Scott Simkus and others, Baseball Reference people, Gary Gillette, they did a lot of the research over the years digging for these. What's that like trying to find background for Puerto Rican baseball?
Well, I like it, but it's very difficult. I do it alone. I have to go to the University of Puerto Rico library and dig up in the newspapers, the principal newspapers of the era, read them and write, and that's how I discover things. And well, in 20 years, I have done, I think maybe I'm 45% what I would wish to have.
Hmm.
But now with the Negro Leaguers, it's another world. You have to,
Sure.
yeah, it's very interesting work, but it's very difficult. Like, you have to have a lot of patience and you have to invest a lot of time.
Sure.
I can be in the University of Puerto Rico since 9 in the morning to maybe 10 in the night easily. And the person that is in the the desk
Hmm.
front desk, to say, how can you do that? You don't get tired, or you don't have.
I hear you.
Yeah, yes. I get maybe tired. My eyes get hurt because of the light of the computer, but I have to do it. And I think that when you do that, it's because you are born to doing that.
Yeah, and it gets, like I said, it gets in your blood.
Yeah.
You get on something and you want to keep on following that, the breadcrumbs, right? To see where it all goes. I know, I get it. I think it's fascinating work. Um, Maybe we need to get you set up with some kind of a network. Like, do you know who John Donaldson is? The Negro League
Yes.
pitcher. So
Yes.
Pete Gordon, who I had on way back in the beginning, he was one of my first guests that I had on. He has he I don't know how he did it. I could ask him, but he, John Donaldson had a long career in the Negro Leagues, going back to All Nations in like the early 19 teens, all the way through barnstorming hundreds, if not thousands, of games that he played, and an effort to get him noticed and potentially into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, he had a whole network of people who were just sending him whatever they found in their town that had to do with John Donaldson. And he called it the Donaldson Network. And there were dozens, I'm not sure how many, hundreds, I think, of people who would send in a box score from here that they came across in their library, or something, and it really helped him put that story together about John Donaldson. Maybe we need to get you a network of people that can help you dig in Puerto Rican baseball, because I think it would be pretty interesting and pretty fascinating work to find out as much as you can, because it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And with this all this pandemic thing, I had to stop because the library is closed. I was working all the record of all managers in Puerto Rico since 1938, win and lose, victories and defeat from every manager since 1938. And what I was, I think I have about 75% already. That's a huge, because in Puerto Rico, nobody talks about what managers did. And you have to know who was the number one, number two, number three. And I am in that project, plus the Negro Leaguers. And since that page, Negro Leaguers Puerto Rico, I have received more invitations from the United States. And they,
Good.
And that's my goal. That it's not a personal goal. They know me. My goal is that they know the history of Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
Two different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more people find out those connections between not just the Negro Leagues, but also U.S. baseball with Puerto Rico, I think the more people will get interested in this. Because I could talk to you and people like you doing this kind of work all day long about baseball
Yeah.
history and stuff. I just think it's just incredible, and it tracks along, with kind of what's going on in the country. I mean, it sounds cliche when you say that baseball history, but it really does, and it shines a light on what was going on at certain time periods and everything else. And before we got on, you mentioned some things. If you can maybe talk about them a little bit. The one thing I know, and there were many black baseball Negro League players who went to Latin America, who obviously enjoyed their stay there better than they did here because of the conditions, the Jim Crow, the racism that was going on here. Many didn't come back. Like Wild Bill Wright went to Mexico and opened up a bar and stayed there. He never came back, Bill Wright. Many, Willie Wells. And that's the hard part about Negro League baseball history that I'm trying to, hopefully help maybe give some context to, is people talk about the barnstorming and the playing overseas as if that's somehow a bad thing. It's not. It was part of life for these guys, and not just in black baseball in the Negro Leagues, Latin America, but white players in major leagues. They barnstormed and toured as well. I mean, it was something that was common. So what was it like because you said Josh Gibson is revered in Puerto Rico. What was it like? What was life in baseball for these baseball players coming here from the Negro Leagues to Puerto Rico?
Imagine you come from the United States, you're a Negro ball player, you come fighting segregation, and when you get to Puerto Rico, you can go to any restaurant, any hotel, walk with anyone. There's no segregation. Every fountain, you can drink water in any fountain, go to any bathroom. And that's why they came to Puerto Rico year after year. You have a Willard Brown, that's the greatest Negro leaguer in Puerto Rico, and he was invited by the governor to the governor's mansion. So when Willard Brown was invited to the governor's mansion in his state, never. And they call him here the man, ese hombre. And I have a picture of Willard Brown in the Fortaleza, governor's mansion. And this is this white woman giving a kiss here to Willard Brown. He can do that in the States in that time. So, and then you have to imagine, okay, today is the last time of the last day of the season. in Puerto Rico. I have to return tomorrow to the United States. So after 4 months in this heaven, now I'm going back to fight against like a segregation. It
Right.
was very difficult. And that's why Brown and Satchel Paige, Gibson, Leon Day, as a matter of fact, Leon Day, if you see his play, Cooperstown play, he has a cap of Puerto Rico. He's the only one that has a cap of Puerto Rico, Aguadilla.
Ah, interesting. I,
Yeah,
I
and
I did not know that. That is very
yeah,
cool.
he played in Aguadilla, and his honeymoon was in Aguadilla, and he lived along the beach, an apartment in the beach, and then his family told that they treated him like a king, and they were all treated like that. And you got Monteibin, who Monteibin played for San Juan, and Pedrin Zorrilla was the owner of Santurce, and he took Monteibin to ride, to see Puerto Rico all over the island and eat. And that Monteibin told me himself, he said, Pedrin Zorrilla took me and when we picked me up in his car, and we visited all Puerto Rico, and we had a great time in Puerto Rico. Laridobi, his honeymoon was here in Puerto Rico too. And so many players. Lucius
Oh, yeah,
Easter,
boy.
wow, Lucius Easter was a player that was so big and so strong, and had was so good of a
Hmm.
player. Then you have Johnny Davis, who was pitcher center field. He's the only pitcher center field to throw a no hitter and be MVP,
Oh,
and led the league in homers.
wow.
And then you got Bob Thurman. Bob Thurman didn't have much time in the Negro Leagues, but he in Puerto Rico, he's the number one in home runs with 120 lifetime, and RBIs with 544, and he won 39 games as a pitcher. And Bob Thurman, Bob Thurman and Willie Brown played for Santurce, and it was like Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth. That time, yeah, that tandem.
Wow.
So yeah, so Joshua Gibson came to Puerto Rico, and the first chance he had to manage was with Santurce in 1939, a young kid. And then you have Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson in 1950, he was signed by Mayagüez to be the manager of Mayagüez. And when he signed the
Wow.
contract in July in New York, they took the contract and sent it to Happy Chandler, and he did not approve the contract because they had to come first to Happy Chandler. So he did not allow Jackie Robinson to manage in Puerto Rico in 1950. But when Jackie Robinson came to Puerto Rico in 1950, 51, 52, he stayed at the Caribe Hill, the best hotel in that time, and today is one of the best in Puerto Rico. And they took Jackie Robinson offshore for fishing, and they make fiesta for Jackie and Rachel
Oh my
in
goodness.
particular houses. I have Jackie Robinson and Rachel dancing with guitars. You see
Wow.
that the guitars. Those guys, when they come to Puerto Rico, they came to Puerto Rico and said, "This is different."
Uh-huh.
Here, we're not gonna have problem here.
Oh,
And we love Jackie Robinson, Gibson, and all those Negro League players. I went to Guayama where Satchel Paige stayed because they play only Sundays. In the week they only practice. And Satchel Paige live in the third floor of the Plaza, Guayama Plaza, and or in the afternoons he had pennies, and he throws the pennies to the kids in the sidewalk, and you see the little kids taking the pennies that Satchel Paige threw them. And Satchel Paige went to the movie, was in front of the movie theater, and Satchel Paige got married in Guayama with
huh.
a Puerto Rican lady named Lucy Figueroa,
Yep.
and the altar boy of that wedding still lives. The altar boy.
No
His,
kidding.
yeah, his
Oh
name
my
is.
goodness. Can you imagine that? I was an altar boy. I went to Catholic school my whole life, all the way through high school. I
Me
was an, I
too. I
was
was an
I was
altar boy too.
I was still serving mass when I was in high school, right? I can only imagine being an altar boy at Satchel Paige's wedding. That would be that's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, that is
and
crazy.
I went with him. I said, okay, take me to the I'm going to the church, and you're going to tell me what happened. And he told me everything that happened in that
Boy, oh
wedding.
boy.
His name is Desiderio de Leon. He was a pitcher. Then he pitched with Santurce and Caguas. He has 95 years, and
Wow.
he was the altar boy of
Oh my God,
Satcher Page.
that is awesome. That is awesome. Boy, you don't think of these things. Today with the internet, and it's good and it's bad. I mean, there's so much nonsense out there. Maybe I'm trying to do my little part here to try to like bring some sense back into things, because there's so much craziness out there and you don't know what to believe half the time. But the thing about today that you got to put it all in context with 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Things didn't travel. News didn't travel at the speed of light like it does today. Everybody in the world knows everything that happened like within seconds, right? So you think of
Yes.
something like that today, if it was in today's context, Satchel Paige getting married to a Puerto Rican woman in Puerto Rico, that would be like all over. That would be on the news. That would be something that would be everywhere, right? And it
Yes.
just kind of went through, and without someone telling the stories, and to have the altar boy still alive today to talk about it, uh,
Yes.
boy oh boy, you hope that these stories continue to be told. Somebody needs to write that down, put that in a book, get a recording, because that with him, because I think that's just fascinating stuff. You know,
Yeah.
Phil Dixon, if you're familiar with Phil Dixon,
Yes.
um, Don Rogerson, who wrote Invisible Men, they have recordings with many of these Negro League players going back 40, 50 years. So their voices, those are like national treasures, to hear the conversations that they had, like we're having with Ray Dandridge and with Willie Wells and with, Leon Day. That kind of stuff is just, I mean, that's, yeah, you can't bring that back. I mean, today, like I said, everything is instant, but some of those conversations, incredible to be able to have heard them. Was it just so the Negro Leaguers? Obviously, yes, they the popularity that was there, but then eventually, though, Puerto Rico, does it get into that same loop for Major League Baseball as far as was it spring training? What kind of games were going on with with Major League Baseball in Puerto Rico?
Well, the first time a major league team came to Puerto Rico was in 1936, Cincinnati Reds,
Okay.
for a series of games before spring training.
Mhm.
And then came the New York Yankees for a series of games. And by the way, Ponce defeated the New York Yankees, and they brought the regulars. They stayed at Normandy Hotel. Joe DiMaggio, the Clipper, came to
DiMaggio,
Puerto
yeah.
Rico, but he was injured. But I have a picture of him in the bed of the Normandy Hotel, and the newsman, interviewing him. He
Mhm.
did not play. And then came the Brooklyn Dodgers with Jackie Robinson. That was the first time that Jackie Robinson came to Puerto Rico, and it was love at first sight.
I bet.
Yeah, yeah, for him and for us. And then so on and on, different years of major league teams came to Puerto Rico. But that
uh,
was those were the first three teams to visit us.
so that was 30s with the Yankees. Did Babe Ruth? Did those teams never made it to Puerto Rico?
No, no.
Reason why I'm asking is because I do know if you ever get to San Antonio, Texas, there's a
Yes.
hotel there called the Cubana that is on the Riverwalk that's set up
Mhm.
to look exactly like a 19 teens, 1920s hotel in Havana. And they have pictures everywhere of baseball, and it's set up like I said, period, all the decorations, everything. It's really a cool little place. And they have pictures everywhere of Babe Ruth playing baseball in Cuba,
Yeah.
and those teams. So it wasn't until the 30s though that Major League Baseball made it to Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Interesting.
1936. 1936. And then in the next decade, the Yankees and Brooklyn.
So you mentioned before about obviously the popularity of baseball in the Caribbean, that Latin connection that's always been there for a long, long time, both with Major League Baseball and the Negro Leagues. But I do remember reading. I can't remember what years it was, but there were so many players leaving from the U.S. to go play in other places, the Dominican, especially when Trujillo in the Dominican,
Mhm.
um, that they actually it almost caused an international incident. They had the State Department, the U.S. State Department was involved in trying to not let these guys go, and then they were threatened if they ever if they don't come back, they're never going to play again in the United States. Those kinds of things. And I
Mhm.
just find it interesting that what do you think the popularity? Why did baseball become so popular in Latin America? Because today, I mean, they make up a chunk of Major League Baseball.
Well, first of all, baseball is so interesting, and in Puerto Rico, there were three sports: baseball, horse racing, and boxing. Yes, those were the three. Then
Interesting.
came basketball, yes, and track and field, but those three. It was baseball, horse racing, and boxing. But baseball was king with all these players that came to Puerto Rico. And Negro leaguers enrich our baseball. It wouldn't be the same. Those Negro leaguers are very important in our history because
Hmm.
all the things that they did, all the accomplishment, all the records that established, and people identify with them. There was once they gave the star of the week. It was in a theater, and this lady that later became a famous comedian in Puerto Rico, Norma Candal, she said that she went to the Paramount Theater. It was the theater, and she stayed outside in the sun. It was in the after mid 12 o'clock, and she stayed 1 hour and a half outside in the under the sun just to see Willard Brown come out and touch him. She was white.
Oh my goodness.
And when Willard Brown came out, she extended her hand and touched him in the arm and in his arm. And then Willard Brown looked at her, smiled to her, and went on. So you imagine a girl of 12 years, 13 years under the sun, hot, burning, just to touch Willard Brown. That
That's
was
a
baseball in Puerto Rico. That was baseball in Puerto Rico.
that. I mean, yeah. I don't think people, and I'm not sure what's going on with baseball today. I mean, personally, I don't like the product that's on the field a little bit with the fact that the three true outcome kind of thing, walk, strikeout, home run. I mean, I like that overall game, a little bit of speed, some strategy. That
Mhm.
baseball that was more kind of like the way they played it in the Negro leagues. I like that style better. And plus, today you uh, you have a lot of different distractions that kids. I think told a story about her being a 12-year-old. That's how you get it in your blood as a kid. I think when
Mhm.
you're young, and kids today have so many outside
Yes.
things that they can do. So, is baseball still popular in Puerto Rico as it was with the younger generations?
Well, it's very popular. Now we have all those major league players in the big leagues,
Hmm.
after Clemente, Cepeda, until now, Lindor, Carlos Correa, etc. And what happens is, I think that happened with the Negro Leagues. Once Major League Baseball comes to Puerto Rico regularly, and Puerto Ricans do not play in our winter league, the interest is not the same.
Hmm.
Plus, you combine that fact with all the entertainment that you have, because
Yeah.
Puerto Rico is a small island, but you have entertainment in every corner,
Yeah.
every week. We have fiesta every weekend. Every weekend we have something, and we like fiesta. We like music a lot. You have horse racing, you have dancing, you have baseball, you have soccer, basketball. So many things in Puerto Rico that we didn't have before. Before you went to from school to your house to your home and you did your homework, see television in the night. Now kids have karate, ballet,
Yeah.
you name it.
Video
So
games. Yeah.
yeah, too many things going
Yeah.
for, and the population is only 3.5 million. So and in some places you're going to notice a decrease in the assistance and attendance. And that's what's happening in Puerto Rico. But
Okay.
we love baseball a lot, and we are always, looking for what our ball players did the night before.
Good.
With, as you said a little bit a while ago, with internet and Twitter and all this stuff, you get the news right on.
Hmm.
Twitter, before you had to wait 1 day, maybe 2 days
Right.
to
Yeah.
have the
If you heard it at all, sometimes, right? I mean, that's the thing. I
yes.
mean,
So
yeah. I mean, the fact that one of the things like I said, I'm doing these conversations to try to give context to all this around the Negro Leagues and the announcements and everything else. And I think what everybody wants to see all the time when it comes to especially Negro League baseball history, but also probably Latin American baseball history as well, they want to see that nice 162 game schedule and everybody's got statistics and they have all the different metrics and all that stuff. It just wasn't that way. It just
no,
wasn't. It just wasn't that way. And you throw in the fact that a lot of it was barnstorming. You look at, I mean, I dig around almost every day. Every day I'm digging around with statistics, Negro League players. And there's just gaps in people's careers where there's limited number of games, hardly any games, no games. And there's a reason for that. I mean, if you don't understand the context of why, you may look at that and go, "Oh, he didn't play in the league that year." No, he was probably playing somewhere. These guys were playing 150, 200 games a year sometimes,
yes.
in there. And so was Puerto Rico the baseball history, similar in that respect? I mean, were players only playing in Puerto Rico? Did they travel around the Caribbean into other countries as well, right?
Well, we can say that until 1937. Once 1938, when the La Liga de Béisbol Profesional of Puerto Rico begins, 1938, and we have a season tournament in winter that began in October to March or to April. And then some football players from Puerto Rico, they began to sign them to the organized baseball in the United States. They travel to the United States. Others stay in Puerto Rico working other things. Other travelers, like let's say Coimbre. Coimbre played in Mexico, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Negro Leagues. The same with Orlando Cepeda's father, Pedro Perucho Cepeda. He played in Venezuela,
Hmm.
Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, but mostly they have work here. They work here or play ball here, amateur baseball here until the season began. And then when all this wave of Puerto Rican, they began signing Puerto Ricans for the organized baseball. Things began to change a little bit.
Hmm. Interesting. The Like I said, I just think that the stories and the context are so important. So keep doing, keep digging, keep doing whatever you got to do. You need any help? Just I mean, because I just think it's so important, and it's the reason why I think, like I said, besides all the distractions, kids, I think if they're exposed to some of this in different ways, whether it be through video games. I mean, there's guys I know and I've interviewed that they're Major League Baseball, the show video game, that they have players from the Negro Leagues from Latin America playing, and you could actually see them. And kids are into video games, right? I mean, that's something that they do. So if there's an exposure in whatever way it is,
Mhm.
music, books, whatever stories that are being told, video games, all of that I think helps and builds that interest and gets people more interested in finding out more, because if you don't hear about it, you don't know about it, and life just goes on, right? I mean, I was part of the thing with the Negro Leagues. The stories, why they're so important. For a long time, the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, like the people who were in power, Commissioner of Baseball, the writers, they were suppressing a lot of times that news about
Mhm.
black baseball players, Negro League baseball players, and so it's important that those stories get back out there and keep being told. What's a good? Give us what's another Clemente story? Because I know you probably got a bunch of those. I mean, the thing about the Dodgers originally drafting Clemente, to me, most people I don't think even realize that, but the Dodgers were pretty good at finding talent, especially in
Yes,
Latin
well,
America.
Yes, well, that Monchile Concepcion and Ramon Monchile Concepcion, Pedrin Zorrilla, the owner of Santurce, who was they were friends with the Dodgers, Al Campanis. And if you see the Santurce uniform jersey, it was Dodgers jersey with two crabs here, the number in red, just as the Dodgers. Uh, there's a very interesting story about Clemente. The Dodgers offered him $14,000. Luis Rodriguez Olmo, Puerto Rican, who played with the Dodgers and now was a scout with the Milwaukee Braves, offered him between 30,000 and 35,000.
Oh, wow. So that's a lot of money for
And
back then.
back then. And
Yeah.
then, but Clemente gave his word to the Brooklyn Dodgers first. And the story says that he went to his mother and said, "Mom, I have this dilemma. The Dodgers going to give me $14,000 and the Braves $30,000. What do I do?" And his mom said, "To whom you gave your word first?" And he said, "To Brooklyn Dodgers." And his mom said, "That's where you're going to sign."
Wow.
With the Brooklyn Dodgers. But Roberto liked the Brooklyn Dodgers because there were many Puerto Ricans in New York, and he wanted to play in front of his Puerto Ricans in the States. So he was inclined to sign with Brooklyn more than the Braves.
Mm-hmm. So this year is going to be the 50th anniversary of the tragic, the plane crash that killed Roberto Clemente. You'd be surprised how many people that I talk to and I know that have no idea about anything with that story. They may know who maybe Roberto Clemente is. And I'm not talking baseball fans. I mean, everybody, knows, but most people, if they're a casual fan of the game and they have no idea. And they go, wow, I never knew that. And they don't really realize the impact that Roberto Clemente had, not just on baseball, but just as a humanitarian and everything else that he was involved in and the circumstances around that. 50th anniversary. What are they planning anything? I know that retire 21. I think would be fantastic. That would
Yes,
be a nice gesture, right?
and I think he deserves to be his number to retire. Frankly, but I haven't heard nothing about the plannings. I know that the Puerto Rican Baseball League is going to do something, but in my case, I'm researching his last 9 days of life, because everybody talks about the 3,000 hits. Everybody talks about the 12 Gold Gloves, but nobody talks about his death. And as a matter of fact, his death is what elevates Roberto Clemente from everybody else. Because if Roberto Clemente doesn't die like that, he will be Hank Aaron, a Willie Mays, a Mickey Mantle.
A very excellent player, but
because he died the way he died, he's above everybody, and nobody has investigated that. There's a person, a Pulitzer writer, David Maranis. He wrote a great book about Roberto Clemente, the best book about Roberto Clemente. And I read it every year. In December, I read that book every year. And I'm very interested about Roberto Clemente those 9 years, because Roberto Clemente didn't know, from my research and my opinion, he didn't know where he was going to. He was a ball player with only 38 years. And ball player, he was accustomed to play ball and to do baseball clinics. He didn't know nothing about planes. What plane was good, what was not good. The plane that crashed was rented by Clemente himself. That causes the death of Clemente came in a plane that he rented. He didn't know nothing. He didn't know nothing about planes, and that plane had a lot of infractions. And the pilot, Arthur Rivera, the owner, a lot of federal infractions in the United States. They didn't supervise that flight. Roberto Clemente was giving baseball clinics in December, and they were putting food and things for Nicaragua. There was nobody in the plane telling where to put that. And the plane was overweighted. And you say, an old plane, overweighted,
Mm-hmm.
and the pilot didn't have license to pilot that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sure death. But
Yeah.
Roberto Clemente was a ball player, and I think that he was left alone because it was Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And he had those baseball clinics that he signed a contract with the Puerto Rico Telephone Company all over the island, plus Nicaragua
Wow.
committee. It's too much for a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he got, mentally, I think it affected him. He got tired, and I feel that he was left alone. That's my opinion. He was left alone, and I have the facts. I said this man couldn't do that. He didn't have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have nothing. There was no working plan.
Mm-hmm.
It was day by day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're gonna make a committee. You're gonna be in front of it. Go for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy Roberto got tired, and it's very sad, the story. That story, but
Absolutely.
it has to be talked about, because
It
that's the
does.
greatness.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it
Good.
because I'm preparing for that.
Excellent. No, I mean, that's like I said, that's the kind of stories and context that people need to get, because a lot of times, when you do try to find some things online, a lot of times it's sanitized and put out in a certain way with a certain viewpoint and stuff. And
Yeah,
I think it's important that the stories
yeah.
get told. When that happened, what was the reaction? I can only imagine in Puerto Rico.
Well, when that happened, I remember Christmas finish. You know that the Christmas in Puerto Rico are the longest in the world. We finished Christmas in January 17th. But in that day, that year that Clemente died, finished. It was, everybody was sad. And I
Mhm.
remember the other day, you have to go to mass because it's a January 1. And I
Mhm.
went to mass, and the priest in the mass talks about Roberto Clemente, and that was very rare
Wow.
for a priest to talk about athlete in mass. And that's when I said, wow, Roberto Clemente, is big, because to see a priest, hear a priest talking about Clemente in mass, and I remember his word. He said, "We lost a great man." I
Mhm.
remember those words, and it's sad how he died. Well,
And
we lost a ball player, a good person, but we won a hero,
mhm.
because he is our hero and a hero of many people around the world. Because
Yeah.
right now he has more statues than any other athlete, and over 125 uh, edifications, buildings, gyms, avenues
Wow.
with his name, and over 75 books written about him. There's nobody who has been more studied than Clemente, but his death is not
Yeah.
well documented or
Mhm.
well discussed.
Mhm.
And
Interesting.
something. Sorry, this is how I wrap it up with Clemente. Everybody wanted to be with Clemente, the ball player. Few wanted to be with Clemente, the humanitarian.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good perspective, right? Because
Yeah.
sure, as long as the spotlight was on him, now the spotlight wasn't on him. Yeah, and that's where he got left to those devices. Yeah, interesting. Interesting. We need to have. Maybe since we're both altar boys, we can get the Pope to talk about Clemente, like they talked about Satchel Paige a few months ago. That was
Yeah.
still an incredible thing with Joe Biden talking to the Pope and telling Satchel Paige stories. We need to get somebody to tell the Pope a Roberto Clemente story and get that elevated to that level. That'd be very, very cool.
Yes.
Uh, so what are you working on now? What kind of research? What do you got going on? With
Well,
either your website or with Puerto Rican baseball history.
I keep working in both websites. Now in February, I'm invited to do I'm going to talk about Negro Leaguers in Puerto Rico in the Black History Month in Memphis, Tennessee.
Awesome, awesome.
And
Yeah,
in April, I'm going to talk about in the Joshua Gibson Foundation invited me to talk
cool.
about the Joshua Gibson in Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
In June, I have to finish a book about Santurce Cangrejeros, 150 pages. That's in this first 6 months. And
You're
then from then
some
on,
busy work.
from July to December, I have to prepare the Puerto Rico Baseball Hall of Fame. They
Ah,
already asked me for the reglamento, how you say, the laws,
mm-hmm. The
uh,
bylaws, yeah.
the
Okay.
rules. I already submitted them, and then that's for October.
I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't realize. I asked you this before we started. Tell us about the Puerto Rican Baseball Hall of Fame because I didn't realize that it's kind of not really functioning right now.
No, it's not really functioned. It functioned 1991, 92, 93, 94, maybe 95, I think. I know that there are 44 inducted, among them Negro leaguers, Leon Day, Willard Brown, Bob Thurman. As a matter of fact, Bob Thurman was inducted in the first year, 1991, first class. And I went to meet him, and I have a picture with him, with Bob Thurman. Uh, and we're planning to make the first induction, the sixth induction in October, and it's going to be in the
Excellent.
Francisco Pancho Coimbre Museum. That's going to be where we're going to do it because in Ponce was that the Liga de Béisbol Profesional of Puerto Rico was born in 1938. So we're going to the tradition, and
Excellent.
that's that's the working plans for this and in the 50th anniversary of Roberto Clemente.
Boy, you got a busy year coming up there.
Yeah,
Holy
a
cow.
very good year. Yeah,
Have you
very good
did you
year.
you know that there's a Leon Day Foundation as well, right?
Yes,
Have you
yeah.
been in
We gave
contact with
them.
them? Because it sounds like there's a lot of great connections between Leon Day and Puerto Rico as well.
Yeah, I have a program with Raúl Ramos that you have in
Yeah.
your yeah, and we have a program on Mondays and Thursdays. And we last year we did the Pancho Coimbra Awards, and we gave one award to Leon Day and one to Joshua Gibson. And we have
Awesome.
Josh Gibson and Michelle Freeman is the director of the Leon Day Foundation and family of Leon Day, and they talk about Puerto Rico. It was very good, and we hope that
Awesome.
we can keep giving this Pancho Coimbra Awards to other Negro Leaguers, very important to Puerto Rico.
Absolutely. Very, very cool. Uh, this was great. You got anything else you wanted to add? This
Well,
was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I think I hope people start to dig more into the baseball history of uh, Puerto Rico. Check out your website. It's baseball, BEISBOL 101.com and negroleaguerspuertorico.com. I think
yes,
that
go
people can
there.
find a lot of cool information on there about these guys playing in Puerto Rico over the decades. So yeah, good stuff.
No, and I appreciate, as I told you, or anytime you have a chance to talking to the
Yeah.
United States in English about baseball history in Puerto Rico, that's a great chance. And I appreciate very much your invitation.
No, thank you. And whatever I can do to help, like I said, I definitely want to give you Professor Ruck. He's got some great history. He's at University of Pittsburgh right
Okay.
now. I think he's kind of semi-retired, but he goes down to um, Latin America quite often, and I think he's working on some other projects down there with some books and other things that he's working on. He's done documentaries. He's done all kinds of things on baseball
Hmm.
history in Latin America. He's a pretty good resource that I think would be really great for you guys to connect. Um, and like I said, anything I can do to help, I would love down the road, maybe as the year goes on, I'd love to hear more about what's going on with the Hall of Fame in Puerto Rico, with things that are going on with anything with Roberto Clemente down the
Yeah.
road. That would be really a lot of fun. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you and appreciate and take care and thank you very
Yeah, you
much.
too. Be safe. I'm going to sign us off. Don't go away. All right.
Okay.
Bye bye.